Good morning. So, really, for the last 2 weeks, we have watched as God has begun to build, God has been to begin to raise a very special nation, the nation of Israel, the nation that He would bring the Messiah through, the nation who He would bring the one who would crush the head of the serpent, the nation who He would bring through that would be a blessing to all nations. And we've been watching that develop over the last 2 weeks. We've seen, and I think those Nancy and I were chatting, we've seen the birth so far of 11 sons of Jacob. We've watched as Leah had four, and then she had two additional to make a total of six. Bilhah had two, Zilpah had two, and Rachel has had one. So 11 sons. By the way, Rachel has another one coming around Genesis 35 or 36, right in that area. So we'll see Benjamin. But so far, we've seen the birth of 11 sons and one daughter, Dinah, who was born to Leah. So Leah's had seven children. Jacob has a family now of at least 12 children. We know that other daughters are born to Jacob that are not named. So we don't know if some of them have already been born or not, but we do know at this point there are at least 11 boys and one girl. Now we must admit, I don't know how in your mind you might have mapped out the birth of the nation of Israel, but this has been a lot more messy than we might have imagined. Deb's face said it all. It reminds us that God sometimes works in spite of the messiness in our life. And God indeed can work in our life to bring all things together for good to those who love Him, those who've been called according to His purpose. And as we look at all of this, we recognize that maybe it all didn't happen according to God's law in the way He would have desired it, but He's been weaving through it all and bringing out good in spite of bad choices. We saw last week the birth of Joseph. It really was at the mark of the end of that 14 years as he had finished up that contract for both Leah and Rachel. And it was then he went to Laban and said, "Bless me, bless my kids, and send me on my way. Send me home. Send me back home." But you remember Laban said, "No, no, 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 not so quick. I've learned through divination, slightly pagan here, I've learned through divination that I've been blessed because of your God, Yahweh. So stay here. Stay with me. In fact, name your wages. Say whatever you want, and I will do it." Now, Jacob, for a second, thinks about it, and here's what he says. Okay, give me the offspring that are speckled, that are spotted, and that are striped, or that are black sheep. Now, keep in mind, there were very few speckled and spotted animals in the sheep, or in the herd, in the flock. Very few black sheep in the flock. So he says, "Hey, just give me the offspring that are speckled and spotted and mottled or black, this black sheep. I'll take those." He's given Laban a sweetheart deal. He's saying statistically, your flocks are going to blow up, but I will get a blessing out of this. I will take the lesser blessing to serve you. And so that was the deal he offered Laban. And of course, Laban responded, "Good. Let it be as you have said. That sounds like a great deal. That's a gravy train deal. Absolutely, I'll do it." You remember what he did next, right? That very day, he didn't even let the ink dry on the contract. And we read, that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his son and drove them 3 days away. He said, "Listen, I can make this a perfect deal. I'll have nothing in this flock but white sheep and solid colored goats and sheep, and I'll get everything. Nothing will be spotted and speckled. You thought you had I thought I had a sweetheart deal. I'm just going to make it even better." Yet once again, Laban deceives Jacob. Laban tricks Jacob. You know what the Bible tells us Jacob did at that point? You guys remember? He watched the flock of Laban. He continued to serve. He did what he was supposed to do. He did what he had agreed to do. He left the injustice in the hands of God. That's what he did. That's where we are this morning. That's the background. So, outline for today. Oh, by the way, I didn't say this. Thus, over that 6-year period, with the deck stacked against him, with Laban having stole away all the spotted, speckled, and streaked animals, he became rich. That's all the animals would bear. These solid colored animals bore spotted. And when Laban would go in and change the deal and say, no, the deal's now for speckled, they would bear speckled. And when Laban would come in and say, no, the deal's now for streaked, they would bear streaked. Why? Because Yahweh had showed up and was leaning into this injustice being done to Jacob. That's the God we serve. Jacob did his job in spite of the injustice. God showed up and spun the tables on Laban. That's exactly what happened. And Jacob, over this 6-year period, became massively wealthy. He now has lots of animals. Notice he has male servants. He has camels. He has donkeys. He is becoming wildly rich. God is richly blessing him. We said, as we look at these earthly blessings in these patriarchs, it reminds us that you and I have been blessed with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ. God has withheld nothing from us as his child. There's nothing he's holding back. He's kicked the door open. You're a joint heir with Jesus Christ, Romans 8. And we see that as a reminder in these material blessings. Well, that's where we ended last week. And we come to our outline today. By the way, a very busy text. By the way, a lot of verses to cover today. So I'm going to talk fast. You'll need to listen fast. And we'll push our way through this. But a lot going on. So we'll see the circumstances change, verses 1 through 3. Jacob will then summon Rachel and Leah to discuss what's going on, verse 4. Jacob confers with them over everything that's happening, 5 through 13. Rachel and Leah respond to Jacob's plan, 14 and 16. Jacob flees Haran back to the promised land, 17 to 21. Laban confronts and accuses Jacob after catching up with him, 25 through 35. Then Jacob chides and confronts Laban, 36 to 42. Laban requests a covenant with Jacob, 43 to 45. Laban and Jacob enter into a non-aggression covenant, 45 through 54. Laban then blesses his daughters and grandchildren, and Jacob continues the trip back home. By the way, in case I don't say it at the end, we will never again see Laban. We will never indeed see the extended family that lives in Haran. This will be the last time that they will be mentioned right here. And someone said hallelujah. Okay. Oh, you guys didn't. Forgive me for not putting that up there, but you have it in your notes. Okay. By way of reminder, where we are, Jacob was sent to Laban in Haran when he was 77. He married Leah, and a week later Rachel when he was 84. He worked another 7 years, and then we see that he fathers Jacob with Rachel. He's 91. 6 years later, where we are today, he's going to flee Laban to go to Canaan. He is 97 years old. This is in your notes. You have this so that you can cut it out and stick it in your Bible as you read Genesis to make sure you don't see anything that you disagree with, and let me know if you do. Coming up, obviously, in just a couple of chapters, we'll see Jacob's son, Joseph, the one born of Rachel. 17 years old, will be sold into slavery. Jacob will be 108 when that happens. But we'll leave this timeline for now, but you have this in your notes. All that for setup to get to our lesson this morning. Any questions at all, it is time to go home. That's from Yahweh to Jacob. We'll see it play out in time. Any questions in the setup before we get running? Let's go. Okay. Verse 1. Now Jacob heard the sons of Laban were saying, quote, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all his wealth. Here's what Laban's unnamed sons, we don't know their names and we don't know the number, Chris, we just know their sons, and they're beginning to circulate this. Look at all the wealth he has, Sean. He got it from our dad. He stole it from our dad. He stole all this from dad. Now this is circulating in the extended family enough that this word gets back to Jacob. Jacob learns that Laban's sons are saying, he has stolen from us. Now let's be completely honest here. Nothing could be further from the truth. Laban has been attempting to steal and attempting to deceive and attempting to manipulate, and Yahweh has showed up, and Yahweh is now moving the sheep to Laban. But you see what Laban's sons are saying. They're saying this injustice is being hoisted on our father by him, by Jacob. Okay, that's bad. Verse 2. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Well, I'll say a couple of things here. If stealing and deceiving and lying is with favor, man, what does it look like when you do not have favor? But you get the point. Even the favor that he had with Laban, Laban is watching Jacob grow exponentially, and he's watching his flock shrink. And he's no longer looking at Jacob the way he used to look at Jacob. And I suspect Jacob's beginning to think, they don't like me around here very much anymore. They look at me differently. Their attitude has changed towards me. Now, when I say things like that, I do want to make a point of application. In life, at times, for reasons beyond our control, our friends, people we like, people we are in relationship with, their attitudes towards us will change for the bad. I don't say that to make you happy. I say that as a reality because we need to face reality. How do we respond? We respond just like Jacob did. Jacob watched the flock. Jacob did what he was supposed to do. Or if we go with our brother, what Paul said, as he wrote to the church in Rome, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil. That's the point. We want to get even sometimes. What I will say in my flesh is, Deb did that to me. Deb got a pound. I'm going to get 2 pounds. And God would say, no. Look what Paul goes on to say. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on us, live peaceably with all. You see, the Lord would say, no. You live peaceably with the person who's doing you wrong. You trust me. You let me handle the injustice on my time frame, and you'll be very pleased with how that works out. Don't take it into your own hands. Leave it in his hands. And as you think about that, as I thought on that point, there's a larger point to never forget. The Lord does not change. If he has set his love upon you because you're his child, because you place faith in Jesus Christ, his opinions of you are never changing. Everyone around you could change. It's grandly irrelevant at the end of the day. The Lord's opinion of you will never change if you place faith in him. And that is the grand reality. And Jacob, I suspect, is living in this reality that although Laban's opinion of him have changed, Laban's son's opinion of him have changed, Yahweh's opinion of him have not changed. Verse 3, and we don't know how this happened or what it looked like, but then Yahweh said to Jacob, we don't know what this looked like. We don't know if it was in a dream. We don't know if he was in the field. We don't know exactly how this little thing worked out, but here's what he said to him. And by the way, this is the 3rd time he's come into his life. You'll see the second one here in a moment. We had no idea about it. It happened a few years ago. Who remembers the first one? Going to Haran in Bethel. It was called Luz at the time. He was asleep with a stone in front of his head, and he had a dream. He had a vision, and it was angels ascending and descending on the stairway, going between heaven and an earth. But there at the top of the stairway was the sovereign God Yahweh. That was the first time. This is the 3rd time. We'll see the second time in a second. It happened a few years ago. We didn't know about it. But as he shows up to him here at the end of this 20-year period, he tells him a direct command and then a promise. Return to the land of your fathers. There it is. It's time to go home. Jacob, go home. It's time to go home. And look what he says. And I will be with you. Now, this is exactly what Yahweh had told Jacob 20 years prior. There in Luz, Sandy, in Bethel. Let's look at it. And behold, as he's having this dream and he sees this stairway, and there's angels descending and ascending on this stairway. And behold, Yahweh stood above that stairway, and he said, I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham, your father, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. He's in the promised land. They own none of it. He said, I'm going to give it to you. This is the Abrahamic covenant now being extended to him. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. That's the scarlet thread. That's the promised Messiah. They may not have known it. We know it. It's in you, the Abrahamic covenant. I'm going to send the Messiah. Behold, I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. You know, as we think on these things, we say things like this: wow, to imagine the promise that God would be with us. We don't have to imagine the promise. We've been given the very promise. That promise given to Jacob thousands of years ago. The writer of Hebrews, likely Paul, said this: keep your life free from love of money. Why, Paul? Be content with what you have. Why, Paul? For he, God, has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. What does money matter? If you're a child of God, you have God. He's walking with you. He's with you. He's beside you. But we see the grand revelation here. And then one more thing, just so I can't leave it alone. We often think, oh, what it would have been like to hear from God. What it would have been like to hear God's voice. We have everything that God has to say to man. Everything that pertains to life and godliness. You say, yeah, but he heard it out loud. Okay, well, read it out loud. It doesn't matter. We have everything that God has to say. Never forget that. So don't look at Jacob and go, oh, I wish we had that much. We've got a lot more. A lot more. Anything before we continue to advance the story? You see the setup. Things have changed there in Haran. And God has showed up, Yahweh has showed up and said, it's time to go home. But don't worry, I'll be with you. Anything else before we advance the story? Verse 4. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was. And he said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my fathers has been with me. Okay, let's unpack this. So he's likely out in the field. Yahweh shows up to him. He has this, whatever it was, a vision, whatever it was. He sends for Leah and Rachel to get them out of the house, to get them away from the servants, to get them away from the kids, to get them away from the extended family. He wants to talk to them privately in the field. He wants to have this discussion with them. So he calls them and he says to them plainly, I see your father does not regard me with favor like he used to. That's the lead. That's how the story starts. But the God of my father has been with me. Now notice who he gives all the credit to. He doesn't say, but don't worry, ladies, I'm clever. Don't worry, I'm smart. Don't worry, I've been able to dodge his flaming arrows. He says, no, God has maintained his promise. He's been with me this whole time. You're going to watch him. He's going to build the case. He likely would have already sent me home naked or killed me by now, were it not for my God. And the same is true for you and I. Never forget that. Continuing on the story, so you see what he says, verse 6. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. Cheating, deceiving, lying, manipulating Laban, and look what Jacob says. I served him with all my strength. Let me make a point. Whatever you do it heartily as you're doing it to the Lord. You see, Jacob didn't say, hey, you've cheated me, I'm just going to slack. You've cheated me, I'm going to coast. You've cheated me, I'm going to just let the flock roam in the wilderness. I'll check on them once a week and see how things are going for them. He worked heartily as if he were doing it to the Lord, and that's a good lesson for you and I. But you see what he tells his wives. You know I served your father with all my strength. Look at this charge. Now, by the way, the ladies don't go, that's not really true, Jacob. You've been a slacker. You need to just be honest with yourself, man. They don't say that at all. Verse 7, yet I've served him with all my strength. I've been there for him, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not permit him to harm me. He seems to think, in fact, not only has he cheated me, not only has he changed my wages 10 times, but he likely might have hurt me, even killed me, were it not for my cleverness. No, were it not for God. That's what he's telling his wives. He's laying everything that's playing out in our life, all of the blessings you see, all of the protection you see, is not because I'm clever. It's because God is good, and God is kind, and God is benevolent. And that's what he's telling his two wives. Now, as you think about this, you're thinking, well, how did he cheat him? And he changed his wages 10 times. Now, puzzle with me. Do you think he was giving him a raise? No, that's not the point. He was continually changing his wages to try to diminish Jacob's wealth. He was continuing to go in and change the deal in his favor. In fact, he goes on to explain it. Oh, I'm sorry, missed a verse. Verse 8. If he, that's Laban, said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. So you can imagine this. Laban goes, okay, Jacob, here's the deal. Whatever comes from the flock is spotted you can have. So from today on, Pam, anything born spotted is yours. And all of a sudden the sheep and goats just started bearing spotted animals. So then Laban James would come back and go, okay, new deal, Sean, new deal, street. All the flocks started bearing street. Laban would go back to Jacob, new deal, new deal, new deal. How about three-legged with a pink stripe down the back? And all the flock would bear three-legged with a pink stripe down the back. Cheating, cheating, cheating. But long before the sheep and the goats, Laban was cheating. If you remember, I said it seems, and this was weeks ago, Laban will prove to be a lot like Lot, driven by a desire to have the things of the world, except his drive is much larger than Lot's. He's willing to run over anybody, including his kids, and you'll see it in a minute. But you get what's going on here. If Laban said the spotted were the wages, then the flock bore spotted. If Laban said the striped were the wages, then the flock bore striped. Now, who is saying this? Jacob is saying this, and he's telling his wives this. Notice he didn't say this. Now, ladies, you were lucky that I'm so clever that I knew how to streak some wood, and that made animals, had a prenatal influence on the animals. That is not what he's saying at all. He's saying no matter what Laban said, it became prophetic in what the flock was about to bear. Why? Because God has stepped into the injustice and acting on my favor now. And whatever Laban says is what the sheep bear. And he's cheated me and he's changed my wages these 10 times. Verse 9, thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. God did it, Jacob says. Not my cleverness. I'm not wealthy because I'm clever. I'm wealthy, Jacob says, because of God and because he stepped into this. Question, somewhere. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll get behind you. Yeah, thank you. Thus God has taken away the livestock from your father and given them to me. Verse 10. Now here's an event that happened likely 6 years earlier. He's telling his wives, maybe for the first time, but this explains everything he just said. So here's what goes down. Likely it happened right after he signed that new contract with Laban, right after Laban then slipped away all the spotted and speckled sheep, 3 days' journey, stole them away, hoping that nothing would be born spotted and speckled. But he shares with them what happened. It was in the breeding season, he tells his two wives, of the flock, and I lifted up my eyes and I saw in a dream. So he tells them when it happened. It was in the breeding season of the goats and the lambs, and I had a dream. Fair enough. And the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Well, James, let's be honest here. All of those goats had been driven 3 days' journey. He's seeing something that does not reflect the reality you see with the outside eyes. Because if he looked at the flock that he was left with, they were all solid colored and black sheep. In the dream, here's the whole flock, and here comes the male goats to mate with the flock. And every male goat is spotted and speckled and mottled. Here's what God's saying. Forget what you see with your outside eye. I'm about to change everything. Every one of them is going to be born spotted and speckled. I'm stepping in. Forget what you see with the human eyes and believe what I'm telling you in this dream, because that's what's going to happen. And you ready for this? That's exactly what happened. The flock began to bear whatever Laban's deal was lately. Verse 11, then the angel of God said to me in this dream, let's pause. This angel of God, you'll see in a moment, is indeed God himself. This is the God of Bethel. Oftentimes in the Hebrew Bible, even sometimes in the New Testament, this angel of God is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, a Christophany, a theophany, a pre-manger Jesus in human form. Here, this angel of God says to me in a dream, he'll be called God in just a moment, don't worry, Jacob, He's in this dream. He says, "Here am I." And he says, "Lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen what Laban is doing to you. And I'm stepping in. I'm leaning in. I'm correcting the injustice. I will fix it. You don't need to do a thing. Trust me." That's what he just told him. And that's exactly what he's about to do. And that's exactly what he did, because we know how the story goes. And this whole flock begins to bear, spotted and speckled and mottled, as really based on what Laban said, but because of Laban's injustice. As he tells this story to his wives, notice carefully, he gives the credit to himself how many times? Zero. Not one time does he say, "You ladies are, Sandy, you're lucky. You married a clever man." He never says that. He says, "We serve an awesome God, and he has done all of this. Not my cleverness, his graciousness and his kindness." Verse 13. As he's continuing to interact with this angel of God, this angel of God goes on to say, "I am the God of Bethel. I am the God you ran into that night 20 years ago. I am the God who was at the top of that staircase where the angels were ascending and descending. That's who I am, and that's who you're talking to. It was there you anointed the pillar and you made a vow to me." You remember, it was there that he promised. In fact, let's look at the verse. So after he'd had that interaction with Yahweh, that stairway to heaven, he woke that morning. And Jacob took the stone, it says, that was under his head, it was likely at the front of his head, and he set it up as a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it, and he renamed that place Bethel, which means the house of God. The name had been previously Luz, which means almond tree. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me," I told you in the Hebrew that means since God will be with me, and will keep me in the way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then Yahweh will be my God. We've all said something just like this. Since Jesus, you gave your life for me, I worship you. I'm following you. That's what Jacob did that night. He said, since you've made all these promises, you're my God. I'm following you. Look, he goes on to say, not only will the Lord be my God, verse 22, and this stone, which I've set up for a pillar, will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Here was a man who God had stepped into his life, and God had changed his life. And he said, I'm following you. I'm with you. And here this same God has stepped back into his life, and he said this, it's time to go home. It's time to go back to the land of your kindred. So verse 13, the back half, now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Well, that's quite a trip. That's 450 miles as a crow flies. That's a long trip that's going to be taken across the Canaanite desert, except now he has a lot more folks to worry about as he goes south. But who has promised to be with him? Yahweh. Verse 14. So he's there in the field. He's given this to Rachel and Leah. Now, what are they going to say? Now, if we don't know the story, I would imagine they're going to say something like this. We've lived in Haran our whole life, dear husband. We've been here in Daddy's house our whole life, and we're older ladies. They're probably in their 60s, 50s for sure. I'm sorry, a 450 plus mile trip across the Canaanite desert, not in my future. I don't think so. Have a nice day. Let's look what they say. Verse 14. Rachel and Leah answered and said, is there any portion or inheritance left for us, to us, in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. They said exactly the opposite. But look at what they said. 2 rhetorical questions, 3 truth claims, and then a conclusion. Rhetorical question number 1. Is there any portion or inheritance left for us in our father's house? In the Hebrew, it's written in a statement that draws to a conclusion of an obvious answer of no. These ladies said, there's nothing left for us in our entire father's house as an inheritance for us. Point number one. Look at their next one. Another rhetorical question with an obvious answer. Are we not regarded as foreigners in our own home? Obvious answer? Yes, they are. They are treated as if they don't belong there by their own father. Yeah, Jojo just mouthed, wow. That's exactly what these ladies are saying to their husband. But let's keep going. He sold us like property. You ever wonder what those ladies thought about the 7-year deal and the 7-year deal and that whole deal? Dad sold them Kitty like property. Like he would sell a used automobile. That's how he sold them. That's how they saw it. And that's what they just told their husband. He devoured our money that he received for us. You see, in that time frame, in accordance with the Nuzi tablets, when a husband paid the bride's price, part of that money went back to the bride. Laban was given 14 years labor as wages. Now, whatever you want to call the labor of the day, he was given 14 years of labor as wages for those two girls. You know how much money they received out of that deal? Nothing. Nothing of the bride's price made it back to them. That's their commentary. That's what they say. And then their next point, the wealth that God took from our Father actually belongs to us and to our kids. It's actually ours. It's actually ours for a lot of different reasons. It's ours because you've labored for all these years. It's ours because it's rightly ours and he's given us none. It's ours. You have it. God has done this. Let's go. That's their conclusion. Okay, so now everybody's on board with the plan. We're headed back to Beersheba, back to the promised land. The ladies, this is the first time in 20 years these two ladies have agreed on anything. And definitely the first time in the last 13 years. They might have agreed during that 7-year period while he was still working. But since the marriages, they've been at each other in this competition for kids. This is the first time they agree on anything, but they agree here, and it's time to go. Laban has tricked us and deceived us as well. Anything else before we advance the story? And Rich has something. Thank you, Lonnie.
Spurgeon says that the Bethel experience is the experience when we understand the depth of the pardoning love of God, that when we link ourselves to the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And he further goes to the quotation that you had up there from Malachi 3:6, that experience is there for us every day because he hasn't changed. He doesn't intend to change, and he intends to continue to protect us and to protect our offspring.
Lamentations. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness to us. Amen. Hey, Warren.
Hey, Rich. I'm glad you emphasized that point that the ladies agreed on this after all the dysfunction over all those years. But it's refreshing even after all of that, they actually have an adult conversation. Jacob, rather than going off and doing it without consulting with his wives, asks them and they have a conversation, and it's a mutual agreement, which is the way it should be.
Amen. Good lesson for all of us, yeah? Oh, okay, James. Fix someone. The microphone's running around. I don't know.
So has Jacob's sowing and reaping stopped? Because Jacob was the deceiver in chief here, the heel grabber. And now I'm seeing him as kind of the forlorn and the put upon. But isn't this just a continuation of the reaping what he sowed? And it's all about inheritance. The ladies are really focused on the money.
That's going to come back around in a second, too.
All right. So it just seems like he's still reaping.
Except now God steps in. Except now God stops the deception that's coming from Laban. God turns the table and he starts to once again bless Jacob. So yes, we do reap what we sow, but there always comes a day, especially when injustice is coming our way from other people, when God will lean into that and show up on our side. So yeah, all those things are in play, but never forget Romans 8:28 and 29, right? At the end of the day, ultimately, if you're a child of God, all things are working together for good to those who love him, to those who are called according to his purposes. Never forget that. Never forget that. And Jacob is enjoying that grand reality right now and being part of the Abrahamic covenant as well. Okay, verse 17. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, hundreds upon hundreds of animals. He's driving them all away. All his property that he had gained, all of the servants, the livestock and his possessions, all that he had acquired in Padan Aram to go to the land of Canaan, his father Isaac. We'll be told in a minute why he picks this particular day. But just accept that a day came and he's loading up the truck and he moved to. No, that's not the right song. He loads up the camels, he loads up the donkeys, and he's headed back to the promised land. This is a massive entourage. I want you to picture two things in your mind that they could be no more diametrically different than these two. For a moment, before we go to Linda's question, two things I want you to catch in your mind. Remember how Jacob showed up in Haran with nothing. Maybe a little bit of money and a little bit of food and a camel. Look at how he's leaving. He is a wealthy man. And again, I would say don't forget that pictures all of those blessings, picture the spiritual blessings we have in Christ because of him.
In a commentary I read, it says that he left under cover of night.
We do not know that I'm aware of. Could be. I wouldn't argue the point. Definitely, if you see it in the text, let me know. I'm not sure. What we do know, and we're going to see it in a second, but I'll just let the cat out of the bag. We do know that Laban is 3 days away. Laban went to shear his sheep. If you remember, he drove that flock 3 days away to ensure that none of them were close. None of the spotted, streaked, and speckled were close. So there could be no crossbreeding. That's going to come into play now because he's 3 days removed from this entire event.
That was in Morris's commentary.
Henry Morris? Okay. I didn't see it, but could be. No, I could be. I don't know. But definitely, again, he loads them up, and you'll see why now. Why he picked this day, verse 19. For Laban had gone to shear his sheep. We'll stop right there for just a second. We learned already that those were 3 days' journey. So Laban goes to shear the sheep. They're 3 days away, and Jacob says, this is the day. Load them up, and he's loading up his family. He was likely waiting to see Laban's little camel head off, and he was, Laban's like, yeah, I'm going to be taking off for a couple of days, heading to shear my sheep up there. And Jacob's like, this is it. It's time to go. God has commanded me to go. The ladies are in agreement. We're going. Then we're told this piece of information was going to come critical in a second. And Rachel stole her father's household gods. She stole her father's teraphim. Now, everyone in the room should get this crazy, puzzled look on your face, and Kristen has a question. Now, wait a minute. Rachel just heard this story about the mighty God and all God had been doing in the life of Jacob, and she runs off and steals a couple little statuettes out of Laban's house. What the what?
So I know when we had first started reading about his relatives, there was the possibility they were believers, but with Laban's deceit, his looking into divinations, and now Rachel stealing these gods, it definitely seems like the two of them, at the very least, were pagan. And even when Rachel gave birth to Jacob, she was not really content. She just asked for more sons, whereas Leah praised God when Judah was born.
When Judah was born.
So they were probably, at the very least, the two of them were pagan.
So let me say this. For sure, Laban was pagan. Practicing divination, he has these household gods, these teraphim. Now, we have an advantage since 1925 when the Nuzi tablets were first discovered, and since I think the 50s or 60s when the Code of Hammurabi was discovered, that shed a lot of light on teraphim and how they were viewed in this culture. We're not going to have time, I suspect, to discuss this at the end of the lesson. I have it in time permitting. So if we do not, when I get home this afternoon, no later than tomorrow, I'm going to put up a video about what we've learned from the Nuzi text about teraphim and what we've learned from the Code of Hammurabi about teraphim and how these ancient cultures viewed these little household gods. There's something mighty insightful that may have explained why Rachel came and stole them. Now, was it still stealing? Yes. Should she be stealing anything? No. So I'm not trying to justify behavior. I'm trying to say there, in the culture of the day, we may find a hint as to why she did what she did. But I'll leave you to decide that, but I will put that up no later than tomorrow if we don't get to it today, which I kind of don't think we will because we're taking time. But you get the point. Rachel steals these household gods. We wonder why. Don't worry, you've got another question you're going to wonder why here in a second. So just stick that one away. Verse 20. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had, and he arose and he crossed the Euphrates, and he set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Okay, a couple things here, just fast things. Tricked is a very unfortunate translation. This is two Hebrew words. The first one, ganab, means to steal away, to carry away, to slip away. Stole away, we'll go with Dean's, stole away. The second word is labe, heart. What he said is Jacob stole away the heart of Laban. Yeah, that makes sense. In taking the daughters and the grandchildren, he stole away the heart of Laban. It's not, now did he trick him to some degree? Sure. Did he slip off, even if it wasn't in the night when he was 3 days away? Yes, all of that is true. But what the Hebrew is saying is he stole his heart. That's what it says. Now, could it be referring to these teraphim? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's referring to his kids. Verse 21, he fled with all that he had. He arose and he crossed the Euphrates. Okay, so here we are. We're in Haran. We're 450 miles as the crow flies from Beersheba. This is the promised land. He leaves Haran and he crosses the Euphrates. Now, he is likely traveling as fast as he can travel. He wants to get out of Dodge. He does not know what Laban's going to do or how he's going to react to this. He doesn't trust Laban. He's concerned that Laban might even take his life. So he crosses the Euphrates and he continues on, we're told, setting his face toward the hill country of Gilead. That is this area right here on the east side of the Jordan. So to blow this area up, this is Gilead. This area right here, he is planning to come south from Haran and then cross over through the Jordan Rift Valley into the Promised Land. That's his plan. He's got a 3-day head start, and he's off and running. He is probably moving as quickly as he can, although he has a massive entourage, a lot of animals, 12 kids, 4 women, servants as well, but that's what he's up to. Verse 22. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, well, why did it take 3 days for Laban to learn? Because he was 3 days away. So likely a servant left as soon as he saw that Jacob was leaving and went and told Laban, hey, Jacob just loaded up everything and left. He left nothing behind. He didn't leave a coffee cup. He took everything. So this servant likely went and found Laban. 3 days took him to get there. And he said, hey, 3 days ago, Jacob has fled. Verse 23. He, that's Laban, took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. So he had made it to that area. 10 days had passed. It's about 320 miles to get there. He's been averaging around 30 miles a day. 3 days before he learned, 7 days to catch up. That's 6.5 for those who are keeping track. To make a total of 10 days, he catches up with him at Gilead. What's going to happen now? Verse 24. Yeah, Sherry said, but God. That's exactly what's going to happen. But God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream by night. And he said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. I can picture this, Rich, in my Yahweh showed up in a dream and he said something like this. You better be careful. You better be careful what you say, either good or bad, or I will clean your plow. That's what Yahweh said to him. You don't think Yahweh talks to pagans like that? Do you remember what he told Abimelech? You touch that woman and you are a dead man. It's exactly how he talks to pagan people. And here he showed up with Laban pursuing hotly after Jacob and said, be careful what you say, good or bad. Verse 25, Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. So here's what we believe it looks like. He has left Haran, following the likely trade routes, and he catches up with him right there, right outside the Jordan Rift Valley, right in Gilead. It's there that he catches up with him. Laban catching up with Jacob. Verse 26. Sorry. And Laban said to Jacob, so he approaches him, what have you done? That you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword. Ooh, very dramatic. You didn't really know the story of what went down, did you? No, he did not. You see what he's doing, right? He's just bloviating. He's just making stuff up. You've driven away my daughters like they're captives of the sword. No, actually, your daughters, we had a conference and they all agreed we should leave because you ripped them off just like you ripped me off. That's the real story. But you see Laban's just bloviating as he approaches him. And again, he says, why have you tricked me? It's the same two Hebrew words. Why have you stolen my heart? That's what he actually says. Verse 27, why did you flee secretly and trick me? There it is again. And did not tell me so that I might have sent you away with myrrh and with songs and with tambourine and with lyre. Oh, if you would have told me, I would have thrown a party. I would have invited all the musicians in town. I would have spent all my money to throw a massive party to bless you before you left. Sure you would have. But don't worry, Laban's he's just lying, and you're going to see it here in a second because you'll see what's in his mind. So verse 27, I would have thrown this big party for you. Verse 28, and why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. You're a fool. The way you behaved is you're a fool. Look at what he says next. This is where he exposes his heart, verse 29. It is in my power to do you harm. Now wait a minute. He's the father-in-law. Now let's pretend for a moment that he thought his son-in-law had acted stupid. Would you go up to your son-in-law who had just acted stupid and you go, what have you done? You know it's in my power to kill you. How did we get there? We got there because that's what's in Laban's heart. We got there because that's what Laban's really thinking. And if you doubt that, I would remind you what God told Laban. Oh, thank you. I would remind you what God told Laban. Verse 29. Laban says, in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father, the God of Isaac, spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So again, he explains, I could take your life, but God told me not to, and that really exposes his heart. Verse 30, and now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. So he said, listen, I know why you ran away. You long to be home. I get it. But why did you steal my gods? Well, Jacob doesn't know anything about that little piece of the story. So let's read. So you can see here's Laban. I understand why you did this, but why did you steal my gods? Now, newsflash, if your God can be stolen, get a new God. I'm just saying. Okay. Verse 31, Jacob answers and says to Laban, because I was afraid. We'll stop there. We have said this over and over again in this lesson. Fear is the antithesis of faith. Fear will cause us to shrink away from walking with God. Fear will cause us to shrink away from trusting God. Fear will cause us to withdraw rather than advance. God has not given us the spirit of fear. Who can finish it? But of power and of love and of a sound mind. Thank you. We should never fear what men can do. We serve a God who superintends over all men. And everything that comes to us comes filtered through his fingers. Jacob said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. That's what Jacob thought. That's what he thought of his father-in-law. That's what he thought about his father-in-law. He thought, if I tell you I'm leaving, you'll strip me dead naked and send me out of here with nothing. That's what I didn't tell you. What a commentary on what Jacob thought about his father-in-law. Verse 32. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. Deb just made the face. We know who has the gods. It's Rachel. It's the woman he loves. It's the one who's dear to his heart. He has no idea. Moses is going to tell us. In the presence of our kinsman, point out what I have that is yours. Here's what he's saying. Rifle through the tents. If you bring back what's you believe is yours, and we'll decide if it's yours or mine. But whoever has the gods will be put to death. That's what he said. And then Moses gives us that little additional commentary. Oh, by the way, Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Oh, I imagine he did not, or he would have never said that. Can you imagine what, as Rachel was standing there when she heard that? When Jacob kind of bowed up and said, I'll tell you what, we don't have any of your stuff, and wherever you find your gods, we'll kill that person. You could hear her swallow. What's going on, baby? Verse 33. So Laban went into Jacob's tent. You can picture him rifling through the whole tent. He's opening up every box. He's opening up every backpack. He's looking everywhere. Then he goes into the tent of Bilhah and Zilpah, the two female servants. He did not find them, his little gods. Then he went out of Leah's tent and he entered Rachel's tent. He is rifling. He is looking, but he is now in, Jojo, Rachel's tent. Verse 34. Now Rachel had taken the household gods. Yeah, we knew that. And put them in the camel's saddle. Interesting. And she sat on them. Okay, newsflash. If you can set on your gods, you need a new god. Get a new god. Okay, back to the story. Sorry. These things come to my mind when I read these things. So she's sitting on her saddle, setting on Laban's gods. And Laban he felt through all the tent, but he did not find them. You can picture him. He is rifled through everybody's tent. Sounds like hers is last. She says to her father as she's sitting on this camel saddle that has in it the teraphim, she says to her father, let not my Lord be angry that I cannot rise before you. For the way of women is upon me. It's during my period. I'm having my menstrual cycle. Otherwise, out of respect and honor, I would stand up, but I can't. So I'll have to stay seated. Was she telling the truth? Maybe, but I'm like you, Dean. My response is probably not. But nonetheless, that's what's happened. So he searched, but he did not find the household gods. Okay, fair enough. Verse 36. Then Jacob became angry. Oh, questions?
It's back in, let's see, the verse 31, where the verse before it, where Laban had asked, why did you steal my gods? Why did Jacob answer, because I was afraid?
Oh, he answered the first question. So he was answering the question, why did you flee? So if you go back to the question that Laban asked, it was actually a twofold question. Why did you run and why did you flee? Let me find it. Verse 27. So let's back up a little bit further. Okay, verse 27. Why did you flee secretly and trick me, steal my heart? I told you what that Hebrew means. And not tell me so that I might have sent away, blah, 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 blah. And then he goes on to say, and why did you steal my gods? So he had these two run-on questions. So why did you run away? He ran away because he was afraid. He ran away because he was afraid Laban would take everything. He ran away because he was afraid when he said, hey, father-in-law, we're going to go on back home. I'm going to go back to Beersheba. Father-in-law would have said, yeah, you're going to go naked and with nothing. And then he answered the second question that Laban said, why'd you steal my gods? I didn't. And in fact, we'll put to death whoever did. And then the whole story unfolds with the gods. Let me get back to where it was. I think verse 36. Deception, lies, it's all there, right? Verse 36. Let me get my notes back to the right place. Jacob becomes angry. He berates Laban. Jacob says to Laban, what is my offense? What is my sin that you've hotly pursued me? Let me ask you a question. Why under God's heaven would Laban pursue Jacob over 300 miles for a couple of figurines he could have bought in any local shop? I would submit unto you what we've learned in the Nuzi tablets and the Code of Hammurabi answers the question, why he wanted those household gods back. So I can't get into it today. I don't think we have time, but I would encourage you. I'll have it up no later than tomorrow. I'll include the link to it. I'm going to share with you what we've learned through archaeology about what they believed about these little household deities, these little household gods, both in Nuzi and in the Code of Hammurabi, Susa.
When Jacob spoke, he made a vow, did he not, about killing or punishing Rachel? And does that not coordinate with Judges 11:35, not to make vows?
It would have been wise not to make a rash vow for sure, right? Because he had just put Rachel in the crosshairs. And let me tell you what we don't know. What would Laban have done had he found the teraphim in Rachel's tent? I don't know. But there's a lesson, Linda. Let's not make rash vows. Right? Thank you. Absolutely. So we've got 5 minutes, y'all, so I'm going to move us quickly through the end of the story. Jacob becomes angry. He berates Laban. He says, "What is my sin that you've hotly pursued me? For you felt through all my goods. What have you found of my household goods? Set it before us, before the kinsmen, that they may decide what we've done wrong." Verse 38. "These 20 years I've been with you. Your lambs and your female goats have not miscarried. I've not eaten the rams, even though I was starving sometimes there out in the field. What was torn by the beast I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. I have been faithful to you as a shepherd. I've served you for 20 years faithfully. You were a hard taskmaster, and even when a lion ate one of the sheep, I had to pay for it. And I did. And you've pursued me hotly across 320 miles of desert. Why? When I've done nothing but good to you." Verse 40. "There I was by day, the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes." Verse 41. "These 20 years I've been in your house, and I've served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. It's one thing to say it to the girls. It's quite another to say it to the guy who did it. And notice Laban doesn't say, "That's not true. I didn't change your wages. You're lying." He doesn't say that at all. Look at verse 42. "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed." That's exactly what he believes. That's why he ran. He knows that Laban would have taken everything. But God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and James, God stepped in and rebuked you, Laban, for me, on my behalf. Verse 43. "Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are mine, the children are mine, the flocks are mine. All that you see is mine." No, it's not. Yahweh has given it to Jacob. You're bloviating it again, Laban. "But what can I do this day for my daughters or their children whom you have born?" He could do anything. He could give a gift. He could give money. He could do whatever he wanted. Because he loves stuffs, he's not going to do anything except kiss them goodbye here in a few minutes. Verse 44. "Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and he set up a pillar. We've seen Jacob do that before. That's what he did in Bethel. He does it here again, but something different happens. Verse 46. "And Jacob said to his kinsmen," these would be his sons, these would be his wives. He says to all of his family, "All of you gather stones." And they took these stones and they made a heap, and they had a meal at that heap. They're celebrating this covenant. Verse 47. "Laban called it Jagar Sahadutha." By the way, that's Aramaic for, it means the heap of witness. Jacob called it Galeed. That's Hebrew, that means the heap of witness. They called it the same thing. Verse 48. "Laban then calls it the heap of witness between you and me today. Therefore he calls it Galeed and Mizpah," which means watchtower. This is the heap of witness and the watchtower that Yahweh will watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. Okay, what is Yahweh going to be watching for? He goes on in verse 50. "If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." This is ironic that this pagan guy with so many gods is now invoking the name of a different. He believes in a a plurality of gods, the perfect God for every minute. Verse 51. Then Laban said to Jacob, see this heap and pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness that I will not pass over this heap to you, so I'll not come south. You will not come over the heap, come north to do one another harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Verse 54. Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country, and he called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his grandchildren, kissed his daughters, and he blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. A few things as we wrap this piece of the story up. Remember how Laban was all over Jacob kissing him when he arrived? Doesn't appear he kisses him now. He kisses his kids, he kisses his grandchildren, and he sends them on away. This will be the last time we will see Laban. This will be the last time we will see the extended family in Haran. They will be removed from the story from here out. Amazingly enough, in spite of what Laban may have done to Jacob, God has superintended over the life of Jacob, protected him, and ended this whole thing on a positive note. But we have one other person to work through. Anybody remember who that is? Esau, the one who said, I'm going to kill him. We've got to deal with Esau. It's been 20 years. We've now got to work our way through Esau. So Lord willing, that's where we'll pick up next week. Any closing thoughts or questions before we wrap it up for today? I present to you Genesis 31. Kristen.
Real quick, in verse 53, it says this is Laban, right? Speaking the God of Abraham and the
Yep.
God of Nahor. So I would assume that's his father, right? Was Nahor?
That's right.
So his father believed in Yahweh.
And theologians are not sure. So it's a great question. I didn't touch upon it. I'll go with what theologians, they're not saying, they're not sure if he's saying, hey, listen, the God that Abraham worshiped, whoever that may be, the God that Nahor worshiped, whoever that may be, the God of their father, whoever that, or if they're saying they all worship Yahweh. So great question, and I'm not sure. It seems to lean toward maybe Yahweh, but Sean.
Quick and simple. Is
Never
there,
reversed it.
I hear you. Is there a rebuttal at all from Yahweh on, Jacob showing a lack of faith when he says, but I was afraid. That's why I did that. Does Yahweh ever respond?
Not that I'm aware of. Not directly to Jacob. Obviously, he tells us many times not to fear not. He tells us, in fact, the count is around 360 in various forms, not to fear. One for every day, right? That's the little saying. But no, not that I'm aware of, does he ever confront Jacob about his fear. But it's good. It's a good reminder for us, though, isn't it? Because we can fall into the fear of man. Never fear what man can do. Any closing? Okay, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to pray. Lord willing, next week we'll pick back up. We've got to deal with Esau. Let's pray.